camera. Okay, that's good. We're set. I tell you, all this technology. I need to get it boiled down to one iPad. I will leave this there for now. All right, good morning. Oh, dude, I have to bring that down. I'm loud. There we go. That sounds better. If somebody can't hear me, let me know. I'll kick it up. But till then, we're going to run with this. All right, let's get this up. And all right. All right. So today we are going to dive into, and I'm going to pronounce this guy's name wrong, Zerubbabel? Zerubbabel. So say it with a mouthful. You'll sound just fine. Zerubbabel. There we go. There we go. Zerubbabel. Got it now. Thanks, Mike. Remind me of my childhood Saturday mornings. Anyway. Date myself there. Anyway, so we're going to learn Zerubbabel returns to Israel. And we're going to see what happens when he returns. And one of the interesting things I was doing my pre-read here, and not only have we been talking about how the Israelites continue to misstep, fail, not follow what they're supposed to do. It is, isn't it? Wait till you see this next neat way. I'm reading in here, and they were called to rebuild the temple. And how many of us have got that project list? My wife has lists for her lists, and they got my name on them somewhere. Anyway, you know, and how many of those are, that's done enough, we'll just move on to the next. Yeah, I get tired of this project, we're moving on. Another shiny object comes around. Hey, look, I can go off and do this. Or how many times do we get distracted from that project that we are enjoying when we started it, maybe. Doing it because we have to do it. Sink leaks, and if it doesn't get fixed, somebody's going to make me sleep under the lake. And then get sidetracked and never really finish the job. The sink isn't quite back the way it was. Yeah, it functions. It gets the job done. You can wash your dishes in it, but, you know, the hand soap dispenser you had to take out to do something else isn't back functioning properly. Or you get done working on the car, and it's like, yeah, I'm not putting the hubcaps back on, and we can just forget that other part there. It functions. It goes down the road. I'm not putting that beauty shield back over the engine. It can just stay off. It doesn't matter. It doesn't keep that engine cold. Me going down the road fast keeps the engine cold. Air-cooled engines. Come on, Volkswagen Beetles. That was my excuse. It didn't work. What? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Had to keep the air moving across the engine to keep the engine cold. Didn't buy it. But a lot of times, we do. Just like the Israelites, when they started with this temple, they started it, and they never finished it. It wasn't until later that they got through. It was 16 years. The people became complacent and lost their focus. And we'll cover a little bit of that and why they lost their focus in our readings. But one of the other things we're going to focus on today, with it being Memorial Day and other things, is how does God actually control the events in our lives? And we'll see that in our activity for today. How God interacts with either kings, queens, governments, people in authority above us. You know, we see many times, how many times do I sit up here and go, and what happened to poor old Pharaoh? His heart got hardened. You know, God said, not going to happen, and hardened Pharaoh's heart. Now, whether it seemed logical for us to do. It's what God did. And he had a greater plan for it. And so we'll study that a little bit. But before we get into our lesson, let's stop for a second and have a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I want to thank you for the opportunity to once again stand up here and present how you have led your people back into the land of Israel and how they've started to rebuild the temple. Lord, and I ask that you continue to be with me as I present this message and how we learn how you have authority over all things. Whether we see that authority at first, and whether we see how you're handling this in your way or not, you are in control. We see that through all the kings. We see that through this passage here in the Old Testament as we look at today, Lord. Please be with myself as I explain this word. Please be with Pastor Jeff this morning and our other teachers who are continuing to educate us in your word, Lord. We ask these things in your name. Amen. So, we will finish this today. It won't get on that. I got to finish it later project. But just remember that even as we fail at finishing things, even as the Israelites don't obey and we cease to obey, the Israelites also didn't finish their projects either on time. So, just one more thing we have in common. And why do we have this in common with them? Because we're all human. And sin. In sin. So we have the few different places to read today. We're thank you. Even the small words I'm tripping over this morning. We'll start in chapter 1 and we'll go to chapter 2, verse 2. Oh, you did better at those names than I did. So, first thing we want to see is who's the king in this passage? Cyrus. Cyrus is the king. And what is the reference to Jeremiah he is referring to here? Yep. The 70-year captivity that had taken place. And that is referenced back in Jeremiah 25:11. So he's referencing the 70 years. And why did Cyrus make this proclamation? Exactly. God stirred his spirit. Just in the same way he had hardened Pharaoh's hearts, or he had turned other leaders to him, he stirred Cyrus's heart. Who was the proclamation delivered to? Now this pays attention because it comes back up in the later part of how we get all this temple rebuilt. Who did he deliver to? All of it. And one of the other things we notice here in 2 Chronicles, if we go back just one page in some people's Bibles, we will see that starting in chapter 22 and 23 is almost identical to Ezra 1. It starts up the same way. 22 being, now the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit in Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom. And also, he put it in writing. Now that's a pretty good point, because putting it in writing at this point in time kind of solidifies it in stone. I don't know how many people have ever played the game of telephone as a kid, but we've tried it once or twice in our Trail Life troop to emphasize communication. And when you have a bunch of kids and you start off at this row telling them, I want chocolate ice cream, and they're to pass that sentence, it is very interesting what you get at the end. And that's verbal communication. We came up with one, I want chocolate ice cream, ends up with something about chocolate bunny at Easter. It's everything gets construed and everything gets messed up in verbal communication. We say things, sometimes we inadvertently say them or we tongue tie it. I'm very guilty of that. Thinking one thing, saying another. I know I said this. No, what you said was what you thought was. Two different things. But here, when Cyrus puts this in writing, that message is going out, and it's the same message that's going out through all the land. So once it's in writing, it's more of a concrete, hey, King said this. It's not my word. King said this. And it's important here because what he goes on to say, while we look at 2 Chronicles, it is only the first part. And when we go to Ezra, we get to the last part. And the last part being, and let each survivor in whatever place he sojourns be assisted by the men of his place with silver and gold, with goods and beasts, besides free will offerings for the house of God that is in Jerusalem. So this is also getting down in writing, which I'll admit took me the second time for going through the Sunday school lesson to figure out why everybody in the world, as we'll see later in this lesson, was giving them stuff to rebuild this temple. I mean, we just got done with the Babylonian captivity and the other countries coming and plunder Judah and Israel, and now everybody's giving them stuff. Well, about the second time reading this, it clicked. Oh, yeah, he wrote that down and told them to do it. So, God, through King Cyrus, had them start rebuilding the temple. So we're going to pick up in Isaiah, and I'm just going to read the verse here. In Isaiah 44:28, What did Isaiah write about Cyrus? And 44. And we see here in 44:28 that who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he shall fulfill all my purposes, saying of Jerusalem shall be built, and of the temple your foundation shall be laid. So in Isaiah, we even see that Cyrus is going to start the rebuilding of the temple. So he's mentioned a few times, and we see here that God is really working what he wants through Cyrus. So how did the leaders of Judah and Benjamin respond? Sorry. They did. They started preparing to return. They started to come back to Jerusalem. Now, one of the other things that we will noticed here is some of the Jews were already there. Not everybody was moved out, because the last time they got conquered, they didn't require them to move them all out. But, well, as we will see here in this second part, were the Jews encouraged by other people around them? Well, they were encouraged because they were brought by, they were given their encouraged, but the gold and the silver and everything else that was donated to build the temple. So what else does Cyrus do to help the Jews in this endeavor? He gives them the temple treasure that has been stolen. We see that in the latter part of verse 1, where they actually take an account of the basins, the censers, the bowls, and the other vessels and everything else was given back to them. So Nebuchadnezzar had come in and stolen everything, probably put it all in a warehouse, I'm guessing. Didn't have it melted down, didn't have it put into a new idol, because it was all given back. And that's exactly what God had wanted, because these are the items that they're going to use to rebuild the temple. So even God's hand was in Nebuchadnezzar in these items not being destroyed, not being melted down into more idols, more rings of adornment, or whatever else these kings do with their gold and silver that they plunder. God's hand was in that, and that these items were able to be returned. Sheshbazzar, is that how I'm saying that, Press? Sheshbazzar? Sheshbazzar, go. He is the prince of Judah, but who actually leads these people back? Yeah, Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel actually leads the people back. So while Sheshbazzar is the prince of Judah, Zerubbabel is the one who actually leads them back. And one of the interesting things in my notes that we call out here is that Zerubbabel is in Jesus' lineage somewhere. And I'm not great with lineage. I go about to my great-grandmother, and that's it. So anything else, I'd have to look at a book or some documentation. But my notes say that he was in the lineage of Jesus. So it is interesting that that lineage is bringing them back into Israel. Now I want to read this one verse for you, Proverbs. And if I can find, there it is, Proverbs 21:1. The king's heart is a stream of water in the hands of the Lord. He turns it whatever he will. So as we think about that verse, how does it help us to understand not only what Cyrus is doing, but what the Lord has done with the hearts of kings in the past? He is. He is. I read this verse, and it says, "The king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord." Now, admittedly, the first thing I thought of was dousing people with a garden hose. Stream of water, I get to control where it goes. I can turn it wherever I want. But it's not a bad analogy. I mean, probably a lot better ones out there, but it shows that God's in control, like you said, Chris. That water is going to go wherever I point it. It's going to come out of that hose at how many PSI is in my house at the time and how many people are taking showers and stuff. But if I point it at the gardens, it's going to water the garden. It's not going to water the driveway behind me. So here in Proverbs, we see that the king's heart, meaning more than one king, is a stream in the hands of the Lord. So he can shape this, he can mold it. I mean, if we take a look at the way streams form today, even the St. Joe River has moved in some areas. You get what's called oxbow lakes forming, and that's just because as the water hits one area really fast, it doesn't go through another area. They do this. You see that even in heavy rains in your yard. You find the low spots really quick, or find the areas where you need to add more dirt because the water goes where it is led. And here in this verse, we are seeing that the Lord turns kings' hearts the same way we would point water to go somewhere. So he is in control. He is the one who is making these decisions. And the kings are just providing the effects of the water. So as we point the water at the garden and it gets wet, the Lord is changing the king's heart so that Israel either learns something or is being led back to build the temple. God has brought about his plans and delivered his promises by changing and molding kings and leaders' hearts. Okay. Thank you. So as we move on, taking a look at Ezra, we're going to start in chapter 3. Now we're skipping over parts in 2, and we skip over this portion. Chapter 3 happens approximately about 536 BC, which is shortly after they departed. So we're skipping over about 20 years. But as we read through chapter 3, we're going to see what happens. And we'll see this honeydew list concept really come out. So let's start in chapter 3, verse 1, and we'll go to 13, and we'll take a break there before we continue on. So after settling into their homes, what's the first thing these Jews do? They built the altar. And how did they do it? They just built it any old way they wanted? They followed the original pattern that was given to them. So they followed the pattern, they built an altar, and they started offering sacrifices. What were the people afraid of as they built? They are the other peoples of the land. And how else did they worship God? After they built the altar, they started, and then they had what was called it's in here, Feast of Booths, which sounds like a really, really, really long barbecue.
It's from the time of Esther.
Okay.
And so they still do the Feast of Booths today, and they'll get out of their house and they live like in a tent. Uh, and I can't remember exactly why they do it like that, but they do.
Kind of like our church camp out.
Yeah, kind of sort of.
We get out of our house, we go to the campground, we have barbecued stuff, we eat, and we praise service. I'm like, yeah. So we're going to rename the camping trip the Feast of the Booths. Oh, we'll have to make it a little bit longer then. Put that in the idea box, see where that goes. So what preparations are being made in verse 6 and 7? Yep. But the foundation of the temple had not been laid. So they were getting money, getting carpenters. What you do when you normally build a house? You go out and you acquire resources, and you acquire people with knowledge that can make the inspectors happy, and away you go. How much time has passed as we move into verse 8? We got about 7 or 8 months that have passed since the time they started this. Now, one of the nice things that was happening is they laid the foundations. We see a lot of praising going on. We see cymbals. We hear shouts of joy. They're praising and singing as they start to lay this foundation. And they shouted with a great shout that was heard a long ways away. But as we start to see in the earlier verses, that the people get afraid of the other people around them. And so, it's going to be about 16 years till this to-do list gets done. Because of other people that they're afraid of. They're afraid what the neighbors are saying as they're building this new addition onto their house. They don't finish it. So as we move into Ezra 6:13, Ezra 6:13. The temple finally gets finished. So let's read 6:13 through 22, 11 verses with really hard names in it. Excellent. So when does the temple finally get completed? How long? Anybody do some quick math here? It's about 21 years after Zerubbabel had led them back into Jerusalem. So it takes them 21 years to finish the temple. And the reason you see a lot of this is because they're afraid what everybody else is thinking and the uprising of the other people in the area. So they finish it. And how did they respond at the dedication of the temple? We see that again. How do they respond? And just before that, they offered dedications to this house with rams, bulls, lambs, a lot. They offered the sacrifice to God according to the book of Moses. So they're still following what Moses had laid out on how to rebuild this temple, how to dedicate the temple. And if we go back and look at the way the original temple was built, we'll probably see a lot of the same similarities in the way this one is being built with the original one. How did the people respond by keeping the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread? And they did that by earnestly and with joy. Now, one of the other things that we see in this passage is we see everybody who hasn't come back yet to start coming back. It was eaten by the people of Israel who had returned from exile, and so everyone who had joined them and separated himself from the uncleanliness of the peoples of the land to worship the Lord, the God of Israel. So you see all these people who have been scattered, the tribes, northern and the southern, coming back with the temple that's being rebuilt. And everybody's getting together, and they are rejoicing in the building of this temple. So what's the significance about this event? What's the significance? Yes, people are coming back to God. What's another significant event that we may have out of this? What about the people who are not Israelites? What are happening with them? If we take a look at this, God has chosen, as Charlie said, his people to come back to him. But throughout history, we're also seeing God extending his grace yet again. So the people of Israel, the priests and Levites, and the rest of the returned exiles, so everyone else who had come off, whoever had been exiled out of the place, have come back. But also the other thing is we are having God's extending his grace to the people who are in the area. Because this feast was eaten by the people of Israel who had returned from exile, and also by everyone who had joined them and separated themselves from uncleanliness, separated themselves from the people of the land to worship the Lord. And we see that in verse 21. So not only is God welcoming back his people, he's extending this to the other inhabitants in the area. So not only has God shown favor on the Israelites once again by having them rebuild the temple, but he is also extending some of this grace to the foreigners who were in the land. Okay, because I don't have the word proselytes in here. So that would be a key thing. Okay. Okay. Yep. Because it says uncleanness in the peoples of the land to worship the Lord, the God of Israel. So that would fit with that the people who had joined them. Correct. So we see this, that God has used the King Cyrus, and also we see 3 other kings mentioned in the beginning of this. Where was it at? I don't have those written down, and I wanted to. Yes, Darius, Artaxerxes, and Cyrus. Yep, right there. By decree of Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, kings. Artaxerxes.
He's the king that had Esther.
Okay. Through 3 of them, they finally get the decrees to rebuild this. So God is using these kings to get to the hearts of people. And we're not going to get to it today because I was slow. But this is a really good activity. It's called the King's Heart activity. And I would like for everyone to take a look at that activity throughout this week. And I don't want you to look at it as an activity that is how God hardened Pharaoh's heart or how God took care of, King David, or how he worked through Pilate. Look at that. That's a good way to look at things. But I want you to apply it to today and what is happening on the world stage with the world leaders. We're seeing a lot of things change. And apply what we're seeing here, because there are a lot of things that are happening, whether it is in our own country, whether it is in some other country, whether it be Ukraine, Russia, France, Canada. They just had a new election. The God is in control, whether we agree with what's going on out there or not. I'm sure we don't all agree with what Saul did to his peoples. But God put him in control for a reason. Now, Cyrus, from what I've seen here and what a little bit I've read of him, because I don't know much about King Cyrus, sounds like an okay guy. I mean, he let the Jews rebuild the temple. But I'm sure if I lived in that age, I wouldn't have maybe that same opinion. Look at the king's exercise today, or this week, and think about, well, God hardens his heart, these kings' hearts, or God lets things happen for this reason. God's letting stuff happen for a reason today. He is not sitting back up there watching. He is still orchestrating events. And for someone like me who follows politics probably closer than I really should, it's a very good reminder to step back and remember that someone else is in control. And someone else has a greater plan than I do, that I see this much of a plan that is far bigger than anything else. So, I'd like you guys to take that exercise this week, look it over, pick 2 or 3 of those verses, and see how God is actually working in our rulers and is working in our governments to ensure his will is done. Maybe not what we want, maybe not the way we like things, but to ensure his will is done. Because as we saw, all the stuff of the temple came back. Nebuchadnezzar didn't abscond with it, melt down. It came back. Cyrus gave it back. And not only that, but God softened Cyrus's heart so that they had even more funds and more resources to rebuild the temple, showing again that God is in control. And God has a greater plan for us than we do. So think about that. Nick, would you please close us in prayer?